right, well, welcome back.
That pizza was delicious.
Oh, good. Good. Did you have the cheeseburger one?
I had a little each.
That's Jonathan's.
Yeah, that's good too.
All right, well, welcome back. This is Two Beards in a Bible. I'm John Swano.
I'm Dave Tenney.
And we have left off in John chapter 15.
Verse 9, I believe.
Verse 9, all right.
I guess I'll read this time.
Go ahead.
I'll read through 17. Jesus, red letters again. As the Father loved me, I also have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. These things I have spoken to you, and my joy may remain in you, and that your joy may be full. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for his friends. You are my friends if you do whatever I command you. No longer do I call you servants, for a servant does not know what his master is doing, but I have called you friends. For all things that I heard from my Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you, that you should go and bear fruit, and that your fruit should remain, that whatever you ask the Father in my name he may give you. These things I command you, that you love one another. That was a new command he gave them, wasn't it?
Yeah, there you go.
A new command I give you. Right?
To love one another.
Yeah, so as the Father loved me, I have also loved you.
Mm-hmm. We have that word abide again, which is, we talked about last episode, being those that abide in him.
Yeah.
And when you think of love, and you think of the idea of Christ laying down his life for us, and where did we see that?
Well, I in John 10:17, Jesus says, "Therefore my Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it again."
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and back to where we're at, as the Father loved me, I have also loved you. Abide in my love.
Right.
The idea, I think, here is that Jesus followed the commandments of his Father.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where that love sprung forth from.
Right.
Think about in Mark chapter 14 where Jesus is praying and he says, "Not my will, but thine."
Right. Right. Yeah, that's, and he's speaking there of that will of the Father, that following through that Christ is doing right there in verse 13 of chapter 15. Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for his friends. And then the next verse, you are my friends if you do whatever I command you. And, Christ has laid down his life, literally. And in many cases, hopefully we live to an old age and we die of natural causes of some sorts. I guess that's the desire of most men, most people of mankind. But, we also, in a parallel, we lay down our will, our life, because we are friends with Jesus.
Yes.
So there's that. It kind of goes both ways. I don't know if I'm wrongly drawing a parallel there, but I see one.
Oh, I think I totally agree with that. That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to give up. It's just this whole idea of putting God's commandments in front of our own desires.
Right. And again, imitating Christ.
Yeah. And Jesus did that, right?
Mm-hmm.
He put God's commandments in. I always think about him praying in the garden. Mm-hmm. I'm convinced he didn't want to die on that cross or go through the scourging or any of those things.
Right.
The human side of him knew that this was not a good thing.
Right.
It's going to be a horrible, horrible way to go. But he knew that that he needed to put the Father's will above his own.
Right.
So
Yeah. That's the whole point.
yeah. There's this other section here because he does, he uses this idea of servants. He says, "No longer do I call you a servant." He goes, "For a servant does not know what his master is doing." He says, "But I call you friends. For all things that I heard from my Father, I have made known to you."
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like there's now, I guess he's talking directly to the apostles here. There's definitely a change that's going to happen here, and the apostles are going to be in a different place than they are now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this applies to us or not. He says, "I heard from." It kind of seems like he says, "You did not," and this is the reason I say that. He says in verse 16, he says, "You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you." He's talking specifically about the apostles.
Yeah.
And I think this idea that Jesus is not calling the apostles servants anymore, he's calling them friends.
Right.
I think for us, we're still servants.
Yeah.
Sons, daughters.
Yeah, I can see a parallel to us being friends as well. If you're a friend of Christ, you're going to do what he's asked.
I'll be a friend to Jesus.
Right.
So,
Right. And but yes, in the context of who he's speaking to and what time, this is not directly applicable.
Yeah.
In that specific.
I think he's kind of talking to the apostles there.
Yeah, because. Yeah, verse 16 there. Christ chose mankind, but he's speaking to speaking to the select few there that he chose.
He chose.
He
them.
handpicked.
Yeah.
To be his apostles. So.
Yeah. He says you should go and bear fruit, and that your fruit should remain.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, we're
I
living proof of that right now.
This is one of those places where you probably just shouldn't think too much about it and just
exactly, yeah.
It says what it says.
Right, it does. Whatever you ask the Father in my name, he may give you. Think about all the miracles that the apostles did.
Right.
After Acts chapter 2. These things I command you that you love one another.
Mm-hmm.
So he tells them that, but it's still.
And that obviously, that generally that's just a good idea, and we can find that in other places in the scriptures directed directly at the church.
Yes, absolutely. John, why don't you read 18 through 25?
All right. If the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love its own. Yet because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. Remember the word that I said to you, a servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they kept my word, they will keep yours also. But all these things they will do to you for my name's sake, because they do not know him who sent me. If I had not come and spoken to them, they would have no sin. But now they have no excuse for their sin. He who hates me hates my Father also. If I had not done among them the works which no one else did, they would have no sin. But now they have sinned. Now they have seen and also hated both me and my Father. But this happened that the word might be fulfilled, which is written in their law. They hated me without a cause.
Okay. So, again, here's another one of those things. So, who is he talking to here? I think he switches, but
go ahead.
But I think, for the most part, he's talking directly to the apostles.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we know the rest of the New Testament story, we know that the apostles were persecuted. Mm-hmm. But Christians throughout the ages have been persecuted, so you can take it to apply to them as well. right? Luckily, we don't deal with that a whole lot.
Mm-hmm.
It says if you were of the world would love its own. Yet because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. And definitely, the apostle. That was the apostles.
Mm-hmm.
They in that frame of reference, they didn't like Jesus, and they certainly didn't like those who came in his name afterwards.
You know, for all but John, their days were
Oh yeah,
were numbered.
yeah.
You know, so to speak. You know, after Christ died.
Certainly, you see the boldness that the apostles had. You know, when you read the book of Acts,
Mm-hmm.
and they just, man, they were awesome.
Right.
I mean, just really, really manly.
Yeah, and all of the, you know, and we'd previously up to now been speaking about the apostles and you know, kind of banging our heads saying, why don't they see this?
Right.
But you're right. You know, when it came time, when the time had fully come,
Yeah.
you know, they had been prepared by Christ. They had received the Helper.
Yeah.
And they went forward and acted with great fearlessness.
Oh yeah. I mean, you know, I think it's in Acts chapter 4 where they're Peter and John are in front of the Sanhedrin, and I mean just the boldness with which they speak, and just we're not going to read through that, but I mean it's just awesome. You read through that, then you see that you know they had a lot of diversity, they had a lot of problems, but they stood for what was right, regardless of the circumstances.
Right.
You know, they said they talked about Jesus said there's not salvation in any other. There's no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. Which you know the Jews had to have been gnashing at their teeth when that
Right.
was said.
Right. That same boldness that we saw Christ speak with, you know, that also was frowned upon by the powers that be.
You know, Jesus says back here in John, he says, if they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. And when we read through the Old Testament and we think about the prophets, what happened with them?
Right.
They were persecuted as well.
Right.
And I think that's why down here in verse 24, he says that they hated both me and my Father. And,
yeah, that's verse 23. Yeah.
Verse 23, and that's not something that was new. You know, the Jews, it's funny, like the Jews, you know, they would go after all these other gods, even though they knew that they weren't supposed to worship any other god.
Right.
You know, and why did they, what would possess them to do that?
Yeah.
Other than, the only thing I can think of is it was just their hate for God. They
Right.
didn't love their Father.
Right. Yeah. That independence that we tend to get as human beings, and start to think that we know enough to strike out on our own path.
Yes.
You know, it's
Yeah.
that's just in mankind, and you know, they're from the fall of mankind.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah, I mean, when they rejected the prophets of old, they weren't rejecting the prophet; they were rejecting God as well.
Right.
I'm looking at Ezekiel chapter 3. John, you can just share my Bible here
I'm watching you.
once I find it. Ezekiel 3, you know, I've got it underlined. So God's talking to Ezekiel here, and he says, "But the house of Israel will not listen to you because they will not listen to me." You know, and that's really what was going on during Jesus' time too.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Mankind hasn't changed.
Yeah,
And it's the same. It's the same today.
Yeah.
And this, statement that you had pointed to in verse 23, he who hates me hates my Father also. There probably aren't a whole lot of people, especially I think in this country, that would admit to hating the Father.
Yeah.
But in effect, when you boil down the fruit, going back to last episode, speaking of the true vine and the branches, and when you add it all up, if you're not following the Lord's will, then in His eyes, that's a hatred for Him.
Yeah, absolutely. Verse 22, what do you make of that?
If I had not come and spoken to them, they would have no sin, but now they have no excuse for their sin. I think of one of my cousins that always would say, "Well, now you've been told." so once we've been told, we have no excuse. We have in our case, we have the word here. We've been told, we don't have an excuse. And in as far as Christ, He came and spoke to the Jews. He came and spoke to the Sanhedrin. He spoke to the scribes and the Pharisees, and they're without excuse, right?
Yeah. In Peter's second sermon, which is Acts chapter 3 verse 17, he says, "Yet now, brethren, I know that you did it in ignorance, as did also your rulers." They did these bad things because they were ignorant.
Right.
Which is I hate that word.
Mm-hmm.
My grandma always told me, or she told me one time, to talk about something when she did when she was young, and she goes, I weren't stupid, I was just ignorant. There is a difference.
And what have we always been told? Ignorance is no excuse.
Right, exactly.
It's what is the difference between ignorance and just what is ignorance?
Ignorance is just not knowing, right?
And in some cases, maybe it's blissful ignorance, and you just don't want to know.
I think that's why he says, if I had not come and spoken to them, they would have no sin.
Yeah.
Because they wouldn't know.
Right.
And that's really what, when we talk about sin, a big component of it is the knowledge of sin.
Right.
That's why I think, you might talk about when is the appropriate age for a child to be baptized. You and I were actually talking about this on the phone last night.
Yeah.
But it's that's the idea. When kids understand what sin is and what the consequence of it is.
Yeah. And I've heard of groups assigning a specific age of accountability.
Yeah.
And actually putting a number to it. And that's that's one of those places where if you're just looking for a checkbox, you miss the whole point.
Yeah.
It stems right out of the knowledge of the truth. And do you know what sin is? Do you recognize sin in your life? Then if you're at that point, then I think you're there.
Yeah, absolutely. And both of my kids, before they were baptized, I know we had lots of long talks about these things, and I guess when they understand.
In fact, Angela and I say this with a grain of salt, but it's kind of like we tried to talk them out of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Because they were pretty young, being in the boys' case probably 10, 11, and Otoria's case maybe a smidge older. But anyways, we wanted to be sure that this was coming from them and not, they're preachers' kids. So they listen to this all the time. So I guess it stands to reason that it might sink in faster because they're exposed to it all the time. And but we wanted to be sure that they were not just acting to be than,
Yeah.
mom and dad pleasers.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I think my kids are about between 10 and 12,
Mm-hmm.
somewhere in that age, when they were both baptized.
Right.
Yeah, that's, I was 31.
Right.
So,
Yeah. I don't remember. I'd have to do the math.
in your 20s?
Yeah.
Yep. But yeah, so there's, this idea of, when you come to know what sin is, that's when you're accountable for it.
Mm-hmm.
And, the Jesus came and, that's basically, he's telling them what sin is.
Right.
Like for real. And he's doing, and Jesus also did things that nobody else had ever done.
Mm-hmm.
He's performing miracles that have never been seen before or since.
Right.
And that's why he says, if I had not done among them the works which no one else did, they would have no sin. But now they have seen and also hated both me and my Father. He did all these things and they hated him for it.
Right. Reminds me of the discussion of between the rich man in the account of Lazarus and the rich man, in torment, asking for someone to be sent to talk to his brother,
Yeah.
and what is he told? He has the law and the prophets.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, we have the word. They had at that time what Christ is speaking of here. They had the very tangible, visible actions of Christ to as proof, and still that wasn't enough. I mean, how many times do people say, "Well, just if only I could get a sign from the Lord,"
Yeah.
But we know here that's not enough.
Yeah. What do you think about this? I underlined this because I thought this was interesting. In verse 25, it says, "But this happened that the word might be filled, which is written in their law. They hated me without a cause."
Mm-hmm.
But he refers to it as their law.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the way I took that is, it's to the Jew. It was to the Jews individually.
Right.
But it's almost like he doesn't include himself in it.
Right.
It's not his law, even though he probably authored it.
Mm-hmm.
But he calls it their law.
Right. Yeah. No, I don't. I don't have anything more to say.
Well, what do we got? Is it 22 minutes?
I can't tell. That's 22. Yeah.
22, yes. Let's read the last two verses.
"But when the Helper comes, whom I shall send to you from the Father, the Spirit of truth, who proceeds from the Father, he will testify of me. And you also will bear witness, because you have been with me from the beginning."
Okay, and we've talked this a bunch of times, but just this idea that the Holy Spirit is going to come, and the apostles are going to know everything.
Right.
And we see the proof of that because the personalities, the actions, the reactions of the apostles, starting in Acts chapter 2, are totally 100% different than they are in the Gospels.
Right.
You see this transformation. What you got there, Johnny?
I was just looking at the note in here about Psalm 69:4, speaking about they hated me without a cause.
Yeah,
I was
it's just a reference
just
to
chasing
that.
a side rabbit over here.
So I mean, I think that's what, and of course, we've mentioned before, 2 Timothy 3, chapter 3, verse 16, big letter, little number, big number, little number, where it talks about, that God's word, that the scriptures are inspired.
Right.
That they are God breathed.
Right.
So, you ever think about this? Is that I've thought about how did that work? And when you read through the New Testament, you really see the personality of the writers,
Mm-hmm.
and it's almost like the Holy Spirit gave them they knew what they had to write about, and they wrote about it in their own voice.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and for in my mind, whether this is the case or not, it makes good sense in my feeble mind that it had to be that it's helpful to have it set into the pen of different personalities.
Yeah.
Because there may be some that take more to this personality or that personality, but nonetheless they say the same thing, and they agree, which is something that is difficult. It makes me think of in Luke. It seemed good to me, also having had perfect understanding of all things. This is Luke 1 at verse 3. From the very first, to write you an orderly account, most excellent Theophilus, that you may know the certainty of those things in which you were instructed. So, not that there weren't other places that Theophilus could have gotten this information.
Right.
He just wanted to make sure it was written down in a way that he was happy with.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's the same inspired word.
Yeah.
It's just coming from a perspective of someone who's maybe a little bit more, I don't know if I want to use the word nitpicky, concerned with detail.
Well, and Luke was a doctor.
Right.
Probably a Gentile, most likely. It's interesting, that he was the one that wrote the Gospel of Luke and the Book of Acts. He was a traveling companion of Paul, but
right.
But he was the kind of personality, just like when you read Paul's writings, you're like, man, some of this stuff is just, it's hard to wrap your mind around.
Right.
Even Peter said that, some of these things, he said some of Paul's writings are hard to understand.
Right.
And it's not because Paul's writing something different. It's because he's explaining it at a level that's above what maybe Peter's explaining it at.
Right. And that's one of the things that we find in the scriptures, that no matter how many times you read through these scriptures, you're going to learn something new each time.
Yeah.
And I just don't know that I've ever found that to be so much the case in any work of mankind.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I just can't bring myself. Once I've read a book, I've read a few, not as many as you in my life, but once I've read through a book, I can hardly make myself pick it back up. But it's not that way with the scriptures.
Yeah, and I'm the same way. The amount of books I've read twice is small.
Right.
I mean, and there is a book that I read when I was in like high school, and I reread it like 10 years ago.
Right.
But that's enough for the rest of my life. I'll never read it again.
Right.
So, do we have now? We'll go ahead and stop here, John. I don't think we have enough time to get into chapter 16.
Sounds good. Well, in that case, I think that's my cue to say thanks for joining in, and we hope you see fit to join us again. This is Two Beards and a Bible.
Thanks.